Okay, it is now 12 o'clock noon. And once again, thanks everybody for coming out for our this week's virtual Water Ambassadors Lunch and Learn program. We are heading into the home stretch. We have two more presentations to sort of end our year, so to speak. And hope you can make it for those last two. Just let's go over a little bit of the logistics of the webinar. If you haven't been here before, next slide, please. Okay, so everybody that's logged in, your microphone is muted. If you have trouble hearing us, you can click on that arrow shown next to the microphone symbol there, and you can adjust your audio settings. We also ask that you keep your video off. That kind of helps make the live stream run a little bit more smoothly. It's just taking up less bandwidth. And you can click right here on the participants to see who's here. We will use the chat box for questions. You can enter them anytime. We'll probably get to them. We'll most likely get to them at the end. It's going to be a little tough to answer them as they come up. And again, there's the leave meeting button if you do need to leave. Okay. Next slide. And again, this webinar is being recorded, as have been all of our other Water Ambassador webinars, and that web address is where you can access them. We typically get them posted generally by the end of the week. Certainly by next week, today's will be posted. So look for that on the website, and please do view some of the other ones that you missed. There's quite a lot of topics and a really great breadth of topics on water quality and stormwater for Martin County. Next slide. And again, as I mentioned earlier, please use the chat feature to ask questions. Okay, next. And today, the speaker is me, Vincent Encomio, and I'm going to talk to you guys about some of the water quality resources that are available for you as the public. We are fortunate to be in a period of time over the last several years, probably within the last 10 years, there's just been a lot of interest in water quality and getting data out, not just for scientists and managers, but also for the public as well. So I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about that. Let me just share my screen.
All right. Vincent, just a heads up, you are a little crackly also. I don't know if there's something you can do.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure. Let me just get that. How's it now? It's okay?
Sounds better.
Okay. All right. All right. So I'm going to get this queued up here. And so that's the title of my talk, A Citizen's Guide to Water Quality Monitoring Resources in Southeast Florida. I did notice a question in the chat box, I believe from Pam, about whether or not I would talk about Delray water quality in Delray Beach. Unfortunately, I really focused more on Martin County. And hold on, let me see if that's advancing. Is that advancing? Nope. Let me try it. There we go. Okay. And so sorry for that. Hopefully this will point you in the right directions to look at other potential water quality resources that are down in that area. But as this is the Martin County Water Ambassador Program, I wanted to focus on some of the local resources here. Believe me, there's quite a bit, and there's no way I could cover all of Southeast Florida. But come back to me later. You can email me, and we could talk about some other resources that might be available. But the whole idea for this talk is to introduce you to some of the water quality resources that are easily accessible on the internet. these can be accessible to the general public. So I'm going to show you a little bit on how to access and how these resources could potentially be used. For example, one use potentially is if you're a teacher, some of these are great resources for teaching, especially for middle school and up to high school, utilizing that data to have the kids sort of explore on their own and provide them guiding questions on what that data might mean. And the other reason is, one, first and foremost, for your health and safety. Some of the data that's available to you can help inform you on whether it's safe to actually swim or recreate in our local waters. And then hopefully that'll increase your understanding of water quality impacts to the estuary. And finally, I want to talk about ways that you can get involved in these kinds of efforts in water quality monitoring. So as I mentioned, I'm gonna talk a lot about mainly about resources that focus on the St. Lucie estuary in our region of the Indian River Lagoon. If you can see here, I added this in. It doesn't come through on the Google Maps image, but this is the Roosevelt Bridge. And if you live here in Stuart, you know the Roosevelt Bridge is kind of in a little bit of some disrepair at the moment. And hopefully that's not going to last too long. But that going from that image to, there we go, just lost my mouse for a minute, to a depiction of the watershed of the St. Lucie. And you can see all those blue lines, the C24, C23, C44, those are all canals that were built to drain the lands surrounding in this area for development, for agriculture, for whatever consumptive use of that land it was needed for. And so this really represents an altered watershed and quite much vastly expanded from the original watershed of the St. Lucie. And that represents or symbolic of water resource modifications throughout Florida, particularly South Florida, where this is showing the historic flow of water from the Kissimmee Chain of Lakes through Lake Okeechobee into the Everglades. And on the right is the image of what our water situation is now with respect to flows, is when the lake levels get too high. There's a dike on the south rim of the lake that protects the communities to the south of the lake. And when those lake levels get too high, they have to release water to the east, to the St. Lucie, and to the west to the Caloosahatchee. And those discharges can be quite damaging. The image on the left is from 2013, what is referred to locally here as the lost summer, where we had multiple months of freshwater discharges into the St. Lucie from Lake Okeechobee. And we've had a number of bad discharge years that I'm showing here, from 1998 to the most recent in 2018. 2016 was also another significant year that brought a lot of attention to this area, not just the nation, but even internationally as well. We had CNN and New York Times coming down here to cover the discharge events that started in late January, early February, I believe, and lasted all the way through the summer into the early fall. And we had extended periods of blue-green algae blooms that got a lot of attention. And a lot of public outcry because of these events have, the silver lining of that all is that it did lead to the public pushing for some changes. Senate Bill 10, which is the C40, which represents the C44 reservoir, is one of those changes, but also increased local support for water quality monitoring. And some of that increased support is through some of the monitoring efforts by our local health departments. The Martin and St. Lucie County health departments, as do the other county-based health departments throughout Florida. They track water quality by monitoring Enterococcus bacterial counts. Enterococcus is an indicator for human waste. So that gives us an idea of like how impacted our water is. And this is part of a statewide Florida Healthy Beaches program. Generally, they test water on a weekly to bi-monthly frequency. And based on those results, we'll issue health advisories shown for both high bacteria, but even also blue-green algae as well. And there's 2 representative signs shown there on the right. So this website, and one thing I wanted to point out is that I created a little list of all the web resources that I'm going to talk about today, and I'll post those in the chat for you to download, and all those links should be active. So don't worry about the web addresses that from these screenshots that I'm showing. But this is the Martin County Beach and River water sampling results. You could pick the outer beaches, as you can see right here in the active links below, or the rivers. I'm going to show you what the river sampling, well, first I'm going to show you what the beach sampling looks like. And you can see those rankings of good, moderate, and poor. Those are reflective of those levels of Enterococcus bacteria after they sample the water. And just so you know, locally here in Martin County, they typically sample on Mondays, and usually they'll get the results posted by Thursday, which will also be published in the paper, or at least it was at some point, and I think it still is. And if they get a poor result, they'll resample that to verify. And if the verification comes back poor as well, they'll issue a health advisory for that particular location. And what's shown here is the Roosevelt Bridge. That's also representative of some of the St. Lucie River water sampling that the health department does. And I mentioned that there was after 2013 and 2016, there was increased support for water quality monitoring in the St. Lucie and the Indian River Lagoon as a whole. These 4 sites, or the 3 additional sites to the Roosevelt Bridge, are representative of that increased support. And you can see here, this is last week. Well, it goes up to last week. You see these are weekly samplings. Red basically means bad or poor water quality. And you can see here, poor is 71 or more CFU, which stands for colony forming units. That basically means the amount of bacterial colonies that show up when they plate the water on a media that's favorable to grow Enterococcus. That gives them an idea of how much Enterococcus might be in the waters at that time of sampling. Red, bad; yellow, moderate, not so good; and green, good. So the St. Lucie County Health Department also does conduct similar samplings in the St. Lucie, mainly in the North Fork. And I want to show this because this is a little tough to find on your own. So again, that link will be posted in that little resource sheet that I'll post in the chat a little bit later. But again, same thing. They test, in this case, they test bi-weekly at 3 sites. Well, now currently 2, as one of the sites is closed. And then it gives you an idea of the Enterococcus counts for those particular sites on that sampling day. And all of these, again, are part of the Healthy Beaches program. This is showing some of the beach areas in St. Lucie County, the ocean beaches that are tested under the Healthy Beaches program. Here's just a zoom in on that. And for example, you can click on these lines here or view samples, and it'll show you exactly the sampling efforts. In this case, it was weekly for JC Park, and it will show you what the Enterococcus counts are, how they're ranked: good, moderate, or potentially poor. And again, I show you those levels of Enterococcus colony counts that help designate whether the water quality from the perspective of bacteria are good, moderate, or poor. So that's some of the health department, and those are important because that's kind of like the first thing for me personally that I would check to make sure that wherever I'm going, the water quality is going to be safe for me and my family to enter, whether we're swimming, snorkeling, or kayaking, or some sort of water activity. The other data that is also available is a lot of these several entities or organizations have real-time or what we call live data that's accessible on the internet. So these are data streams that are being collected by sensors, sometimes every hour, sometimes even every 15 minutes. And these are managed and funded by either federal or state support, but they're managed by federal, state, university, and nonprofit organizations. And again, as I alluded to, mentioned earlier, a lot of these stations expanded, the number of stations expanded after the discharge and bloom events of 2013, 2016. And just keep in mind that these are only data. So there is no interpretation of what that data means, like the health department bacteria counts. So if you go to this website, this is the USGS current water data for Florida. You click on the statewide water quality table here, and it gets you to this page, and you scroll down, and you can find 3 sites within the St. Lucie River. This one, Speedy Point, I'm going to focus on. But these 2 sites that are in the river itself, in the estuary itself, these are old names. Speedy Point actually represents the Roosevelt Bridge, and this A1A Steel Point is actually right at the Evans Prairie Bridge, which crosses from Stewart onto Sewell's Point. And just looking at the Speedy Point or Roosevelt Bridge site as an example, when you click on that link here, right there, gets you to the top of the page, and you can see you can select different data to look at. The default might be temperature and conductivity, but you can select salinity. This is showing what the temperature data is. In this case, the default is a week. You can also download that data as in a tab separated, what they call a CSV file. And then you can import that into Excel and look at the data that way. I'm not going to go into that because this actually, the file format is actually a little bit complicated, and you kind of have to play around with it to get it to how you want it. But that data is collected, for example, this temperature data is collected every 15 minutes. And here's, I selected salinity to show as an example. You can also, if you just want to look at a graph of the data and use that for whatever purpose, like a presentation or to have for your own records, you can actually select that, and it creates a nice graph for you. And this is salinity changes. This is TOPS, which is the surface salinity over the last week. And you can see how it fluctuates quite a bit. And again, this is right at the Roosevelt Bridge. So that's one resource there. A somewhat newer resource, that USGS resource has been around for quite a while. And that Roosevelt Bridge is particularly important as a monitoring point for a lot of scientists and managers that are using water quality data to set water quality standards. Another system, more recent system, is created by the nonprofit. They're based in Fort Pierce, ORCA, which stands for Ocean Research and Conservation Association. They've developed this system called the Kilroy system. These are supposed to be lower cost real-time water quality monitoring systems. They have about 18, almost 20 in the whole Indian River Lagoon. And again, I'll provide that link. But this is what it looks like when you open up that web page. If you float your arrow above any of these pushpin points, it'll show what the data is at that moment in time. And then if you can also plot that historical data by selecting that button. You can plot 2 parameters at one time, one on the X, or 2 on the X, and then it'll put time on, 2 parameters on the Y axis, and then it'll put time on the X axis. But once you select create plot, you can determine the range dates that you want. The default here is 3 days. The only difference between that and the USGS is you can't download the data in a tabular format. So you're using the graphing functions of the website itself. Again, this is salinity this is at Willoughby Creek, which is downstream in the St. Lucie River. This is showing salinity on the left y-axis and water temperature on the x-axis. I mean, I'm sorry, the second y-axis. And I set the scale of salinity from 0 to 40 and let it auto scale. You can see that check mark there for temperature. But that's a nice handy resource as well to look at how water quality is changing at these particular sites. And another newer one is created by or run by the Florida Atlantic University at Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute. This is the Indian River Lagoon Observatory Network, or IRLON. They have 10 systems in the region collecting data hourly. And it's quite both systems, the Kilroy and the IRLON systems, are collecting not just physical and chemical water quality, but also chlorophyll to measure changes in potential algae blooms and nutrients as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm not going to get too into that. But if you float your cursor over the interactive map, you can zoom in. Let me go back real quick. So this is all the sites that they have in the Indian River Lagoon. There's 10 sites. You can use that map to zoom in on a particular area. And again, I'm going to focus on the St. Lucie River. If you float your cursor over the left side of those buttons, it'll show the current water quality at that moment in time. And you can select the stations directly on the left. And if you do that, you'll see graphs for each of the parameters. You don't see all of them here. You have to scroll down, but you get the idea that all of these parameters are graphed. Again, the default here is the last 3 days of data. But if you click on download data, you can look at those specific parameters. You could change the date range, and you can look at either in graphical format, or you can download these as a text or CSV file. And just to keep in mind that if you do want to download the data, you have to register on their website. And that probably helps them keep track of how many people are using the data and and giving them an idea how valuable that particular station's data might be. Again, and also these graphs are interactive as well. If you float your cursor over these points, it'll show you the value, in this case salinity, which is expressed here in PSU, which stands for practical salinity units. You can float your cursor over these points and lines, and it'll show the data value for that particular time point. So it's pretty valuable for being able to download the data here. I'd show you an example of what that might look. I downloaded data that I just showed you in the graph and exported it into Excel. And then I was able to create a graph of salinity over time. In this case, I did the last week as opposed to the last 3 days. But this is, I'm using this graph. I just want to show you what some of these, this is just salinity, but some of the water quality, I want to show you what some of that means, at least for me as someone who uses salinity as an indicator to determine how natural resources might be being affected in the estuary. Ocean salinity is generally around 33 to 36 PSU, practical salinity units. Oysters, which I've done a lot of oyster restoration work in the St. Lucie and the Indian River Lagoon, they are happiest within this range, although they will be fine from 10 to 30 plus. But this is the range of salinity, that brackish water where fresh and salt water mix in the estuary. That's where they like to be. As you start getting below 15 parts per thousand, that starts to be stressful to different seagrass species. And those kinds of conditions definitely can occur when we get lots of freshwater inputs into the estuary, even in the outer portion of the Indian River Lagoon near the inlet. And as we get below 5 PSU, those are stressful to even causing mortality, particularly if we have extended periods of freshwater or low salinity below 5 for both oysters and seagrass. So that just gives you an idea. Just keep in mind that the salinity values here will vary. What that means for different natural resources will vary depending on where you are in the estuary. So this is, I'm using the middle estuary here. Again, this is close to the Roosevelt Bridge, and it represents sort of a general estuarine condition of brackish water, and what changes in salinity might mean for resources in that general area. It will be different. 5 parts per thousand of fresh water is completely natural in the upstream regions of the St. Lucie, like in the North Fork and the South Fork. So just keep that in mind, that these aren't set criteria or standards, but it helps give you an understanding of how water quality data may affect different natural resources within our waters. But there are some water quality data or parameters where there are standards, there are criteria that determine whether they're harmful or good for estuarine or aquatic organisms. This is a dissolved oxygen on the left, a concentration of oxygen that's below 3 milligrams per liter is considered stressful. And of course, as you get down to 0 with no oxygen at all, that's harmful and will cause mortality. Again, reflective of this, we actually have state criteria for oxygen saturation in the water. And these are just to give you an example of how these are defined for the state of Florida. Percent saturation, any values below these numbers are considered harmful, whether they're on a daily, weekly, or monthly average. And where that becomes important is this is a Kilroy system, Orcas Kilroy system in an area in the Indian River Lagoon in Brevard County. And this is a particularly bad fish kill that happened in 2016. If you've been in the area for a little bit, you might have recalled that. This is detecting oxygen at 0 at one point in the early morning hours. And that is representative of conditions that help cause that fish kill. Or resulted in that fish kill. So this is kind of where the value of some of these stations are. They can detect these events. No one's out sampling water at 3 in the morning. And so it helps understand what's going on in these locations and what are some of the problems that might be inherent in the water quality in these locations. But as these are fixed locations, these are fixed stations, even though the water quality is being collected on a very frequent basis, even less than an hour or more frequently than an hour at a time, there is still some value for volunteers or people to actually help sample water. They're a little bit more nimble. They can respond to conditions more quickly. So we're still a big supporter of citizen science efforts in water quality monitoring. And some of those local programs here in the St. Lucie and Indian River Lagoon are run by two nonprofits, the Florida Oceanographic Society and the Marine Resources Council. Their program is called Lagoon Watch. There's also a UF program, Water Watch. And also the Surfrider Foundation is another organization. They have a program called the Blue Water Task Force where they're actually monitoring bacterial levels as well. For sometimes they're weekly testing in the case of FOS and MRC, the Marine Resources Council, they might be testing water quality weekly. They're less frequent than those real-time stations, but it's a great way to get people involved, increases their engagement with being stewards of the environment, increases their knowledge of understanding what water quality means, particularly if they're testing at, say, their home site. They've got a great institutional knowledge of what water quality is, where they are, and there's a lot of value in that. in those people serving as the eyes and ears of our estuary. And a lot of these data are, I think, complementary to the fixed autonomous live water quality stations, because they are fixed and people can move around. And again, as I mentioned, can respond to events. And those response to events are really important, especially when we're talking about harmful algal blooms. One of the things that Florida Oceanographic does is they do produce a weekly water quality report. So they do some interpretation of the data to determine whether or not those water quality values for those particular regions are good or are they poor, on a through F grading scale. Again, this can be subjective, and all the data do have to be constantly or consistently evaluated to make sure that level of salinity or those levels of pH or water clarity are indeed representative of those rankings of from ideal to destructive. So there is some subjectivity involved in there, but a lot of this data is based on historical data for those particular regions and how the current values vary from those historical values. So it's a constant reassessment. So I mentioned harmful algal blooms. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the resources available to the public for tracking or informing yourselves about harmful algal bloom status in our local waters. This is I'll just go into this right now. The first one is the Florida Department of Environmental Protection blue-green algae dashboard. And the blue dots on again, this is an interactive map, so you can zoom in and zoom out and focus on particular areas. These blue dots represent samplings where they've looked at or tried to determine whether or not there's a blue-green algae bloom in at those particular locations. And the one thing to keep in mind with this program is it is a response, it's responding to reports. So you can also be involved in that process by, if you are in an area where, let's say you live on the water and you think there's an algal bloom, you can report that to DEP and they will come and verify whether or not it is an algal bloom and whether or not it's potentially harmful, because they not only verify if it's a bloom, but also if it's a particularly bad bloom, they'll sample to determine if there are harmful algal bloom toxins in the water as well. And it's a nice one-stop shop to learn about not only blue-green algae blooms, but also red tides as well. So it's a good, nice website to visit to learn more about blue-green algae or harmful algal blooms in general. Building on that, when Governor DeSantis came into office, he created the Blue-Green Algae Task Force and reorganized the Harmful Algal Bloom Task Force. And one result of that is a new website that helps, again, is designed for the public to access. It branches off from the dashboard, but you could see here, these red dots here, or pinpoints, are areas where they've sampled for blue-green algae. If they're red with an exclamation point in it, that means that there are harmful toxins in there, or at least harmful algal species found in those particular locations. And the gray push pins right here are actually areas where they do sample nutrients. I didn't get too much into nutrients because one thing about nutrient criteria is that a lot of the water quality standards for nutrients are based on annual loads. So when you look at, even though the Erlon systems and the Kilroy systems are measuring nutrients, it's hard to use that one time point as an indicator of whether or not that's bad or good. you need a sort of a broader understanding of what nutrient levels might normally be at that particular site. And a lot of the standards that you might have learned about in earlier Water Ambassador webinars, like our Basin Management Action Plan webinars, and I encourage you to check those out if you haven't got a chance yet. A lot of those water quality standards for nutrients are based on these annual loads. So, so I was a little cautious about spending too much on that. But this, just to show you, if you click on these gray push points, it'll take you to a page where you can actually look at what the nutrient levels are at that particular location. And of course, we all are worried about nutrient pollution. That's what leads to those algal blooms. Another resource that's good for you to track cyanobacteria or blue-green algae blooms are NOAA's harmful algal bloom monitoring system, or looking at satellite images of Lake Okeechobee. Again, I'll post that link in the resource file that I'm going to attach. But you can look at that over time. So it's good to know. Luckily here, at least this most recent image, there was a lot of cloud cover, so there really wasn't as much active blooms. But there have been quite a bit of blue-green algae blooms this past summer. So that's something we get nervous about over here if the lake levels rise, and that bloom could potentially either into the estuary or at least bring in the fresh water that can spark another bloom. And again, just to build on, with harmful algal blooms, there are also ways that you can get involved as well. This is a citizen scientist program created by NOAA. It's the NOAA Phytoplankton Monitoring Network. And this was a training we had back in November. Yeah, it seems so long ago, but yeah, we were able to have a face-to-face in-person training back in November, where we learned about different species of algae to identify. We're practicing here on the microscopes. The NOAA coordinator is showing us how to sample water. This is at Layton Park. And now we have a network of volunteers. And if you're interested in that, please get in touch with me. We'd love to have more people. So we had this face-to-face training back in November, and we've had a virtual training a few months ago as well. So as we started this program, getting the program established here in our local waters, we had 2 sites, but now we have about an additional 8 sites. I believe it might even be a couple more beyond that. So we have at least 10 sites between Martin and St. Lucie counties where volunteers are now monitoring algae at those locations, as well as some basic water quality measurements. And the last thing I wanted to show, but I'm not going to get too much into it because I think they'll be covered a bit next week, is related to the amount of water or discharges that can get into our estuary. This is a nice, easy to, again, a kind of one-stop shop website that you can visit, where if you scroll down or you click on the St. Lucie estuary, it'll show you all the inputs of water into the St. Lucie and how much flow is getting in there. CFS is cubic feet per second. And it's hard to describe what that means, but if 1 cubic foot per second for an entire day is over 600,000 gallons. So that gives you an idea of how much. If it was 2,000 CFS, you'd have to multiply that value times, so I think it's 646,000 to get an idea of how many gallons of water that is per day. So, but this shows that if the numbers are positive, meaning there's no negative value on those, that means these are flows that are coming into through these structures. So the good thing here is the C44 canal, which connects Lake Okeechobee to the St. Lucie estuary at the South Fork of the St. Lucie, is showing 0. So there's no flows from the C44 into the St. Lucie River. However, There is a, actually, I take that back. We're getting inflow from Lake Okeechobee into the C-44 canal. So hopefully at this time, so hopefully that doesn't translate into water eventually being released into the St. Lucie. And I know I went a little fast, but with that, I'll leave it to some questions. And while we're at it, let me go ahead and post in the chat. And Lisa's going to throw up a survey.
Yep, I just did that. We have a couple questions in the chat for you. So
Okay.
once you're done posting the resource, I will read the questions out for you.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. That way I can see the chat. And let me see. There we go. Oops. Lisa, how do we, I know I've seen it before. I'm trying to see where we can post a file in the chat box.
I don't know if we can do it in this format. I think that's in the webinar format, but we can make sure that it gets posted under the link on the website. And for those of you who are participating now, I have your names so we can send it out in email directly to you as well. So you don't have to navigate to the website.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I'll send that to you, Lisa, if you could just send it out to everybody that's on here.
Absolutely. And we'll ask him if it gets posted on the website too.
Okay.
For everyone else. So Susan has a question, and I think this is referring back to the Department of Health data. So it says, since sampling is done on Mondays and the results aren't known until Thursday, is there public notice to possibly avoid the waterways on Tuesdays and Wednesdays?
There is not, unless there was already an advisory to begin with. So that's the sort of iffy part of it, is they have to get two readings in a row to where it's bad to be able to post that advisory the way I understand it. So if it was good or moderate the previous week and they test it and it was bad, they have to retest it. And if it comes out bad again, then they'll place that advisory. I hope that answers your question. But in that intervening period, until they can get it re-verified, they try to get that verified before and that data posted by Thursday, though, if that helps answer your question. So at least by that Thursday, when they're making that data available to the public, if they verified that it's bad, then that advisory will get posted.
Okay, great. The next two questions refer back to the Excel spreadsheet where you talked about sort of the different threshold criteria. Mm-hmm. So Susan asks, what is the optimal range of salinity for seagrass?
It depends on species, but if you're above 15 parts per thousand, pretty much all species of seagrass, and we have 7 in the Indian River Lagoon, which kind of makes the Indian River Lagoon unique. If you're in that 15 to 20 plus range, most species are going to be okay. Some of the turtle grass, for example, definitely needs to be in the 20 plus range, but shoal grass, which is the most common species, will be fine from 15 parts per thousand on up. It could even survive lower than that, but once you get below 10 is when even shoal grass is stressed, and all the rest of them are going to be stressed or starting to die as well. So.
Okay. The next one says, how long do unfavorable conditions need to be prolonged before you start observing a collapse in oysters or seagrasses? There is some margin of resiliency for estuarine species with the natural fluctuations in salinity, temperature, etc., correct?
Correct. Absolutely. And thank you for asking that question, because I had a note to myself to say that, and I did not. But estuarine organisms, they live in a variable environment. So they're perfectly adapted and resilient to those daily fluctuations, even seasonal fluctuations in temperature and salinity. Where it starts to be a problem is when, let's say, you have less than 5 parts per thousand for a week plus. For oysters, for example, you get it for eggs and larvae, they start to die off when after a week of those kinds of conditions, persistent, continuous of those conditions. Adult oysters can survive even up to a month of fresh water, but beyond that, they start to die off. So if you're starting to see die-offs of adult oysters, then all the juveniles and all the baby spat that had just settled, or the larvae that are still swimming in the water, they're dead too. And so even though adult oysters are incredibly resilient, oysters in general, to those fluctuations in salinities, we have a knack for pushing them past that. For example, we've had, I'm trying to remember what year it was. I think 2017 was one of the worst recent years for freshwater discharges, and we had well over a month of freshwater conditions at the Roosevelt Bridge. And so as many of the oyster reefs in the St. Lucie are centered in that middle estuary area, they started dying off.
And our next question, is the Ireland system related to Lobo? I see the FAU folks in the South Fork area on a regular basis.
Erlon is Lobo. That is the new name of the Lobo system. They just launched that website, I don't know, like maybe even, definitely this summer. It might not even be more than a month old. So I focused on the Erlon because that is their new name. I don't know the reason for that. And that's their new website. So the one thing to keep in mind is we'll send out these web links to you. Just keep in mind that sometimes they change website addresses. We personally can speak to that. We've accidentally changed the link for which you can access these webinars. So just keep that in mind. And hopefully they won't change them that often. But I know that my original health department links when I was putting this together had changed, and I had to re-find them again. But once you get in the habit of looking at them, you'll know right away, and you'll learn how to get to those sites without the direct link.
Okay, that is the end of our questions. Thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. That really was a robust overview of all of the resources that we have in the area. We'll hang on for a few more minutes in case anyone has any other questions. Just a reminder, next week's webinar is going to be an introduction to hydrology. So kind of an understanding of what you can do with all this data and understanding how the systems work. You need a basic understanding of hydrology in order to be able to analyze and really understand this water quality data. And then an overview of DB Hydro, which is the South Florida Water Management District's data management system. And so for the person who is interested in water quality from Palm Beach County, I believe, DB Hydro does include the entire South Florida water management range, including St. Lucie, Martin, Palm Beach, Okeechobee counties. So tune in for our penultimate webinar.
And speaking about water quality databases, DEP also manages one called, it used to be called Store It for a long time. It is now called WIN, which I don't know what it stands for. But that's where a lot of data gets, it has to be qualified, it has to be QA/QC'd before it gets entered into that database to be usable. But the Erlon and the Kilroy systems and the USGS, all of those systems go through, all that data goes through an intensive quality assurance and quality control procedures that are approved by the state, so that when they go through that process, that data can get uploaded into databases like WIN and DB Hydro, so that managers can use that. It's qualified data that people can use to set, not only do science, but also set policy recommendations. And that's another important part about this data. And also, again, as I mentioned earlier, lot of these stations, that the expansion of these stations were really, I think a lot of it was dependent on you, all of us as people, pushing to make sure that there's data available for the public. So just, I want you to keep that in mind, and that's one of the nice stories about these systems is that there were way less when I first started working here, and now it's almost like I can't even keep track of it all.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in again for our weekly webinar series. It's fantastic to see all of you on a weekly basis, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.